Board member and beloved author and wildly popular Aliens Ate My Homework, Bruce Coville.
Hi, guys. I'm proud to be here tonight representing Syracuse. Thank you, Justice Sotomayor. Before I introduce the Golden Kite winner in the category of nonfiction for older readers, I'm delighted to announce the two honor awards. Jarrett complained about having pronounced the name Oliveira. I got to pronounce his name. Jarrett J. Krosaka. I wanted to catch you before the party. I couldn't find you. For Hey Kiddo, How I Lost My Mother, Found My Father, and Dealt with Family Addiction. Published by Graphics. And Gail Jarrow for Spooked, How a Radio Broadcast and the War of the Worlds Sparked the 1938 Invasion of America. Published by Calkins Creek. Happily, both Jarrett, as you know, and Gail are here with us tonight. Would you please stand up to accept our congratulations? And now it is my pleasure to present the Golden Kite Award for nonfiction for older readers to Elizabeth Partridge for Boots on the Ground, America's War in Vietnam, published by Viking. I've known Elizabeth Partridge, Betsy, for 20-some years now. And though I couldn't tell you precisely what year we first met, I can tell you, with one word, my first impression of her. And that is clarity. In all the years I've known Betsy since, that impression has never changed. Here's an upright, open, fearlessly honest person who has an enormous sense of clarity about her. And now Betsy has brought that clarity to bear on one of the murkiest chapters of American history, our war in Vietnam. She's accomplished this with both economy of prose and a devastating eye for detail, managing to tell the story from all sides, covering the soldiers, the nurses, the protesters, the refugees, and the government through 4 presidencies, beginning with JFK and ending with Gerald Ford. Working in chronological order, weaving testimonies from those who had boots on the ground, that is, those actually fighting the war, with what was happening on the home front, she captures the complexities and moral disorder of the time. In doing so, she also delineates how a combination of hubris and fear caused the war to grow beyond the control of the presidents who, with the best of intentions, at least in their own eyes, began and expanded a conflict that nearly devoured the nation. It is this mix of the personal and the political, delivered with clarity, the big picture and the intimate stories that gives Roots on the Ground much of its power. The book reaches a crescendo with the story of an 18-year-old Vietnamese woman, girl really, trying to escape the country as the fall of Saigon approaches and the U.S. withdraws. Her journey through danger and loss is poignant and terrifying in equal measure to match any adventure novel. I literally, notice I used the word correctly, literally felt my heart begin to race. And then masterfully, she pivots to wrap the book with the story behind the creation of The Wall, the extraordinary monument envisioned by Maya Lin that has become the most visited attraction in Washington, D.C. I'm not giving away the ending of the book by telling you this is where it goes. We all know that's what happened. Even so, the details of the fight to build the wall are riveting. And this final story does what the wall itself is meant to do. It brings closure and a sense of reconciliation and tears. I'm not ashamed to say I was reaching for the tissue box in the final chapters. It has been nearly 44 years since the fall of Saigon. For contemporary teens, the end of that war is much farther back than the end of World War II was for me. Yet the aftermath of that tragedy still reverberates through American politics. And for that reason, this is a story that urgently needs to be told to and understood by the rising generation of young people. We all know Santayana's dictum that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So we need to remember. We must remember and pass the story on. With boots on the ground, Elizabeth Partridge has remembered for all of us and for the generation to come, and done it magnificently. Speaking as one who came of age during that cataclysmic period, who felt renewed rage and grief as I read this, I want to say personally, thank you, thank you, thank you. Betsy, please come get your award.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, you probably won't be surprised to know this book took me 6 years to write. It was a journey. I'd like to begin by thanking SCBWI for awarding Boots on the Ground the Golden Kite for older nonfiction. It's an especially meaningful award to be given by when your peers give you an award, your peers who understand the blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into a book, that each of us put into every one of our books. That's very meaningful, so thank you to SCBWI. I am the very last person anyone would expect to write a book on the Vietnam War. In the late 60s, as the war was really reaching a peak, I was in high school in Berkeley, California. And I would cut school to go to the many protests that we had at UC Berkeley and on the streets everywhere. I have the dubious honor of having been tear-gassed by my own country. I hated the war, the suffering, and the death. I felt profoundly sorry for the young American men who didn't know how to get out of the draft and were sent to fight and possibly die in Vietnam. Over the years, I would hear occasional stories from veterans, but not very often, because they came home, put their heads down, and tried to hide that they'd been in Vietnam because there was so much anger directed against them personally. But several years ago, when I went to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, I was so touched, and I reached out, and I was feeling the letters, and I thought, who are these Americans, these thousands of names of people who died in Vietnam? And I had this sudden, urgent need to make these names something personal. Like, how do you translate a name into a person who lost their life at 18 or 19? And I decided the best way to tell their stories was to find their friends and buddies who had known them, fought alongside them, cared for them, and mourned them. So I had 3 criteria for the veterans that I found to interview. I wanted geographic, gender, and racial diversity so I could tell a bigger story. And I also decided to interview a refugee because there is no war without refugees. In fact, the refugee I interviewed is my son's mother-in-law. And I have such respect for her and how she managed to not only get out of Vietnam, but get out her mother who was failing and 3 tiny siblings. There's amazing stories of bravery, both from veterans and refugees in a war. So all of these people, as I interviewed them, were incredibly open with me. Their memories were very vivid, and many things they told me were painful for them to recount. But they kept going, talking through their own vulnerability, anger, sorrow, and oftentimes haunting regrets. It was finally time for all of them to share their stories and be heard, not only by me, but by anyone who cares to read the book. And as I listened, I realized I held their hearts in my hands. It was such an incredible honor and a huge responsibility to do justice to each of them, and I thank all of them for their courage. I'd also like to thank my editor, Catherine Frank, who is infinitely wiser and much more organized than I am. Seriously. Together, we added the home front chapters in between the veteran stories so that we could tell this larger story of a democracy here at war, both at home and in another country. And designer Jim Hoover, who is here tonight. So Jim, would you please stand up? Hey, Jim. Jim was on fire from the moment I proposed this idea to Viking. He immediately started making himself a playlist of 60s songs. And so we would choose photos. Back and forth, we'd go with these different photos, both of us searching out choices. And there were occasional, very polite but intense arguments about whose photo got to illustrate a particular point. And I would like to say the beautiful, poignant cover on this book is entirely Jim. He finished it and showed it to me. And without my publisher at Viking, Ken Wright, I literally could not have done this book. Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah. More than once, I must admit I tried his patience as I blew through deadline after deadline, but no one's been more supportive than he has. So of course, any war is tough to write about. It's incomprehensible to imagine being caught up in a war as soldier or civilian. I've done my best to share some true stories about what war is really like. I want young people so full of optimism and love and hormones and denial to know how tough it is and how the experience never goes away. And as I was working on the book, something caught up with me, the 21st century. It began as a swell far out in some uncharted ocean and gathered speed as it came towards all of us and hit our shores with the election of our president and swept us up in another alarming, divisive, polarizing time. Some days it feels like we're all going to drown, but we aren't. One good thing the Vietnam War did was to mobilize us, especially those of us who were young and full of idealism and love and fervent beliefs. I'm so inspired, as so many of you are, to see young people mobilizing again against gun violence and hatred, against racism and sexism and misguided authority. I have one other person I'd like to thank from the bottom of my heart. This is my, oh gosh, I'm gonna cry. This is my mentor, Russell Friedman. As many of you know, he died last year. When I was learning to write my first nonfiction book, I would go to the library and check out his books by the armful and read them carefully. How did he do that, I would ask myself. Finally, I had a chance to meet Russell in 2003 when he won the Golden Kite for Confucius, the Golden Rule. In the book that I did with the also amazing Jill Davis, a wonderful editor, This Land Was Made for You and Me, The Life and Songs of Woody Guthrie. And this book we did was the runner-up. And so I told Russell how much his work meant to me, and I asked him to autograph his book for me. I was so excited, and he wrote, "To Elizabeth, almost always a step ahead." So to all of you who are working on your earlier books, you are being given a chance now to change lives. You're being offered a chance to tell funny stories and to tell powerful, resonant stories. Your books can give comfort and solace and tell hard truths. Those of us with published books and awards can mentor you from the pages of every book we've ever written. We're also here this weekend. and for weekends to come. It's your turn to be almost always a step ahead. Thank you.